Hey everybody, Plushie here. 209 videos is the amount of videos that I've made on Koyanskaya of Dark for the past 2 years. So sorry to be a little bit of a bragger here. I think I am pretty well qualified to talk about this servant, and as I promised previously, about a year ago, I will be making a more detailed review on Koyanskaya of Dark, and now is the time. And I apologize for the wait that I wasn't able to push this out right after the banner drops, but here we are. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let's get into today's FGO review of Koyanskaya of Dark. So let's take a brief look at her base stats. So these are stats when she's at level 90 and max silver foed. So her attack is 12,220. This is a little bit low on all SSRs. This is about the bottom 1/3 of all SSRs, and it does kind of hurt her in terms of MP damage, but overall it's not that big of an issue, and she's also fairly tanky with this amount of HP because of the slightly low attack as well. Her cards are pretty standard with 0.67% base gain per hit on 3 hit arts cards, a 4 hit quick card, and the extra attack is quite good at a 5 hit. And also she has some important traits. She is chaotic evil, which allows her to have synergy with Dolman. She is an animal trait servant, obviously allows her to have synergy with herself, and also she is existence outside of the domain, and that allows her to have some synergy with Van Gogh. So overall, her base stat isn't anything crazy, but she has a lot of very important traits that will allow her to have some great synergies. Koyanskaya of Dark's first skill is a team-wide 3-turn buster up by 30%, a team-wide 30 MP charge, and finally it reduces the star absorption rate on all Hominidae allies by 100% for a single turn on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is one of her highlight skills because this is a very nice charge number. AoE 30 allows her to, charge anyone who has a maxed out append to 250, and we all know that in this game you always want to make 50 MP charges because most batteries are 50 MP charge and most CEs also start with 50 MP charge. And tying this nice battery with a team-wide buster buff makes this just one of the best farming skills in the game. The 100% star absorb down on Hominidae allies are almost always a positive, because usually if you are supporting another DPS with Koyan Dark in a challenge quest scenario, you want them to be animal trait so that the second skill actually triggers on them as well. And most animal trait servants are non-Hominidae. The only small group of servants that are affected by this quote-unquote demerit are servants that usually have animal costumes that are still included in the animal trait category. However, even then, it is just a 1-turn debuff, so you can sort of just wait it out for a single turn and then keep on going your merry way. And also, Koyan Dark herself is a strong crit DPS, so having this allows her to actually, get even more stars when she's paired up with other Hominidae support servants, which are most of them. So overall, really strong skill. Koyan Dark's second skill gives one targeted ally 2 stages of overcharge boost for a single time that lasts for 3 turns. It also gives them a buff on attack effect that allows them to get 5 stars whenever they attack with their buster cards for 3 turns as well. And then finally, this skill also buffs the attack and defense of all animal trait allies, including herself, by 30% for 3 turns, and this skill has a 7-turn cooldown. So this is a much more polarizing skill. I'd say the skill is not really that good if we ignore the animal trait specific effects. The targetable 2-stage overcharge boost can be very useful, but it's very dependent on what kind of servants you are bringing with Koyan Dark. However, when you are fighting against Earth attribute enemies, this at the very least is a huge boost to Koyan Dark's MP damage. The gain 5 stars on buster attack effect is also pretty lackluster in most cases, I'd say, because usually teams have way better star engines than this, but this can make Koyan Dark herself more consistent in critting if you are using her as the main crit DPS. I kind of hope this just applied to herself overall and not also be targetable like the overcharge, but it's mostly negligible anyways. But the 30% attack and defense boost for 3 turns is a very powerful team-wide effect. This in normal Buster teams can already make your Koyan Lights more tanky. You can also try to build double Koyan Dark compositions to make your entire team super tanky for 3 turns, assuming you also brought a third animal trait, Servant. At the very least, this is still a 30% self-attack and defense boost, so it's pretty nice when you're using Koyan Dark as your main DPS as well. But I think the main issue of this skill is its abysmal 7-turn cooldown. This makes Koyan Dark very bad at single core Buster looping because she is not able to use this skill twice with Koyan Light in standard Buster looping compositions. This also makes her defense pretty few and far between in challenge quests because a 7-turn cooldown on a 3-turn 30% defense up is just not that good at all. So overall, this is a really strong supportive skill if you are bringing animal trait servants, and the overcharge can enable some very interesting synergies we will get into when talking about her team compositions, but I really think the 7-turn cooldown hurts her quite a bit, and I really wish this skill could get buffed by either reducing its cooldown or making it more universal. Koyan Dark's third skill is a 3-turn Invul Pierce as well as a 3-turn 50% crit up. This also gives her a special status that allows her to apply all 3 types of dot damage, aka poison, curse, and burn on the enemy whenever she attacks with her own cards, and also boost all 3 types of these debuffs damage by 100% for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is an exceptionally powerful crit skill. Even if we just remove the entire dot damage part, it's a 3-turn Invul Pierce, meaning that it allows her to go through Invul and evade even without using her MP, because most Invul Pierces are either 1-turn effects or tied to an MP, so just having straight up 3 turns is very strong. This also is a pretty decently sized crit steroid with 50% crit for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown as well, having relatively okay uptime. Arguably the more eye-catching part of this skill, which is the burn, curse, and poison synergy, is honestly not that practical in most cases. Koyan Dark does have very good synergy with all 3 types of these teams because she not just amplify all these types of debuffs damages by 100% for 3 turns, she also has a targetable 2-stage overcharge, and as you know, most of these teams, their main debuff applier scale their MP's overcharge with burn, curse, and poison amplification. The apply burn, curse, and poison on attack effect looks very flashy, but usually they're not good enough for burn, curse, and poison teams. You usually want to apply those debuffs with MPs on those teams, so this only affects when you are using Koyan Dark herself and using her face card a bunch. For example, if you're soloing with Koyan Dark, this can stack up to pretty high amounts of dot damage, or if you are min turning with Koyan Dark and you're constantly killing off your other supports to refresh your deck, maybe you're still doing Brave Chains every turn, this can also obviously stack up quite a bit. This can help her deal with annoying guts sort of gimmicks, but arguably more practically, the dot damage can trigger 2 specific CEs, the Malaise CE that is free, that allows you to do extra damage against cursed targets, or Honey Lake that allows you to do extra damage to burnt targets. Koyan Dark's first passive is existence outside of the domain, and the passive itself is not important. What is important is that this is a trait that allows her to get buffed by FGO, who is the strongest crit support in the entire game. We will get into a little bit more about that when talking about her team comps. She also has NFF Services EX that allows her to do 20% extra damage against Wild Beast enemies, which is quite a bit. It also buffs her arts card by 5% and also increases her debuff success rate by 10%. The debuff success rate only applies when she is used in a dot team, which is not that significant. The arts up is pretty nice, which makes her arts card just that much better than what it appears to be, but more importantly, the 20% extra damage against Wild Beast enemies is quite a huge number. Now, Wild Beast is a more limiting trait than Demonic Beast, especially in the servant category. There are a lot less Wild Beast servants than Demonic Beast servants, but this is still pretty nice for certain boss fights. And finally, her third passive gives her a chance to buff block all Wild Beast enemies whenever she's attacking for 1 time 3 turns, 20% to proc every time she attacks. This actually becomes pretty consistent if you are soloing with her. Within a couple of turns, this will at the very least trigger once or twice. Usually I wouldn't bank on it, but in certain boss fights, this can work wonders. And finally, Koyan Dark's MP is an AoE 5-hit Buster MP that increases her own attack by 20% for 1 turn before the MP actually deals damage, and it also removes all enemies' offensive buffs when the MP lands, and after the MP activates, it also casts a 3-turn 20% Buster down on all enemies. And its overcharge effect is anti-earth damage that scales from 150% all the way up to 200%. So this is a very strong MP. The 20% attack up before damage certainly bolsters the MP's damage, even though it doesn't scale. Removing enemies' offensive buffs is really useful in certain challenge quests. Obviously, purging enemies that like to spam attack up and crit ups is really valuable, but arguably even more important, this removes Invul Pierce and Sure Hit, allowing her to sort of bypass some annoying boss gimmicks in certain challenge quests. This also casts a 3-turn Buster down on the enemies after the MP does damage, so it is kind of a scale up effect in challenge quest, combining the attack up for 20% and the Buster down for 20% on the MP. This also means that the MP itself bolsters her Buster crit damage quite a bit if you follow it up with a Buster crit card, and she is a very good crit DPS as I mentioned before, and this MP certainly helps. And finally, her overcharge effect is doing anti-earth damage, and anti-earth is a very nice anti-trait to have because many enemies, servants and non-servants alike, are of the earth attribute, so this is a very wide coverage anti-trait. The only unfortunate part is that in the future we will be getting a bunch of AoE anti-earth servants that kind of intrude upon her niche, but this still doesn't change the fact that the MP itself is really good and wide coverage, and she can even bolster this by using her skill 2 on herself. In terms of spending crystallized lores on her skills, I will say spending it on her first skill is the top priority, and then the second priority is actually her append 2 skill if you are focusing on farming. And then the skill 2 and skill 3 are not that necessary for loring because the skill 2 couldn't be double casted with Koyan Light anyways at 7-turn cooldown. However, if you do want higher uptime for your crit up and your Invul Pierce, I do slightly prefer the third skill over her second skill to spend a crystallized lore on. So let's get this out of the way first. Koyan Dark is not an amazing Buster Looper, in my opinion. There are a couple of reasons behind this. So first, and the most minor reason in my opinion, is her slightly lower attack stat, landing at about the bottom 1/3 of all SSRs. However, that is not nearly as significant as the following 2 other reasons. She is a foreigner, so most of the time she's going to be doing neutral damage, and usually if you are a class that usually does neutral damage, you need some form of edge compared to a normal class, because for a normal class they can still do neutral damage in most cases, but they also have this extra niche where against a certain class they're gonna be doing double the amount of damage. Koyan Dark doesn't have the best amount of self steroids, so she only has 30% attack up on her second skill and 30% buster up on her first skill, because she is kind of sacrificing her own numbers for the sake of making all of these skills party-wide instead of just to herself. And of course, the biggest elephant in the room that I mentioned a bit earlier is that her second skill is at a cooldown of 7, meaning that her third wave damage is going to peak a lot lower than other units, even if her first and second wave damage doesn't look as bad under neutral circumstances. She's not able to use her second skill a second time like most other Buster units, being able to use all of their steroids twice on the third turn. So yeah, her third wave damage is going to peak a lot lower, so she's going to struggle a lot more in single core Buster looping, especially on that high HP final wave, unfortunately. So if you are pulling her just to use her as a universal Buster looper, I'm just going to come out and say you're going to be pretty disappointed. However, on the multi-core side of things, Koyan Dark is a completely different case. She's actually really prominent in a lot of multi-core farming teams, and because of a couple obvious reasons as well. So first of all, because of her spread 30 MP charge on her first skill, we've mentioned why that is so good. Being able to give the entire team 30 charge is very powerful. That skill also directly ties to her AoE buster up by 30%, meaning that you only have to heavily invest in one skill in order for her to be already really good in multi-core. On top of that, she also, of course, has that very special skill 2. The skill 2 not just provides animal trait teammates with extra damage, and there are quite a bit of great animal trait AoE buster units, such as Melusine and Ibuki Doji, but it also gives a target 2 stages of overcharge, and there are specific synergies that can form very special teams because of that overcharge boost. So the first team I'm going to bring up that utilizes this overcharge boost is the Triple Fox formation, or Double Koyan Dark, Single Koyan Light. This team essentially doesn't require any starting charge from the CE front, so you can run 6+ bonus CEs. And basically how it works is that you put both Koyan Dark's overcharge on the middle Koyan Light, and then Koyan Light's own battery on herself as well. The two 30 spread charges add up to 60, so you don't need any append skills on the Koyan Light. She can use her MP on the first wave and charge both other Koyan Darks by a maximum of 30 MP because she reaches overcharge stage 5 with two 2-stage overcharge boosts added onto her. Of course, you don't always need a 30 charge on both Koyan Darks. Depends on the append situation and what mystic code you bring. You can definitely spare one of the overcharges onto one of your Koyan Darks and deal with specifically Earth attribute enemies. So this is a pretty great team. I wouldn't say it functions well in 90++ most of the time, but this is a very convenient team that can work on most other lower level free quests, 90+ and below. And also, you don't need to swap anything. You don't need any specific mystic code if you have all their appends ready. And also, this can obviously, once again, run no starting charge CEs at all. So it's great for free quest farming as well as some events. The second team is a bit more future-proofing, but I'm still going to recommend because I think it's very significant, is of course the Koyan Dark and Tonaliko core. So Tonaliko's third skill is essentially a very special skill. It's an AoE 50 charge skill, obviously very powerful, as well as gives the entire party a pretty big MP damage boost. However, it starts out at 5 cooldown, so you can't use it immediately. And the way to use it is that whenever you use Tonaliko's MP, she reduces that skill's cooldown by 1, but that effect can be boosted by overcharge. So if you put multiple overcharge buffs on Tonaliko herself, after using her MP, she can reduce that skill 3 cooldown by a lot at once. So that is where Koyan Dark comes in. Essentially, with this team, where you bring Koyan Dark, Tonaliko, and specifically the New Year's Mystic Code that can give another stage of overcharge, the third member on your party can be literally any unit that doesn't need any append skills unlocked, nor do they need to have any starting charge, and they will be able to MP on the third turn. So you can even fit in a single target on that third slot. This is a pretty nice 2-unit core where you can put whatever in the third, which is really nice. Obviously, those two examples are just 2 of many different ways you can build your team with Koyan Dark. Essentially, any multi-core team that is vaguely buster-centric can run Koyan Dark because of how good that 30 spread charge and 30% buster up already is. There's even ways to sort of manipulate and change up those 2 examples that I brought up. So for example, for the first double Koyan Dark team, you can change Koyan Light into Oberon because Oberon already gives 20 spread charge from his first skill instead of having to rely on the overcharge effect of Koyan Light's MP. However, that team does not take advantage of Koyan Dark's overcharge effect, nor is Oberon an animal trait servant, so he doesn't actually get 60% attack up, so his damage is going to be pretty bad. However, if there's a case where the first wave HP is very, very low, and on the third wave you need a bigger burst, then that can work. Same goes for the Tonaliko and Koyan Dark core. Remember, we specifically brought the New Year's Mystic Code to give Tonaliko 1 extra stage of overcharge. Well, if you have a servant that can already give overcharge or cooldown reduction, option. Obviously, you can switch out that Mystic Code for a more offensive one, for example, the Arctic Mystic Code. And both of these teams are also no plug suit variants, so if you potentially need more charge or you need more damage for like 90++ stuff, you can just use a plug suit instead, and a lot of things work. I have fit her into many different multi-core farming teams, and usually she is not able to clear the final wave, but you know, first and second wave she does just fine. She is, however, not without fault in multi-core farming either. My personal experience, she has two big weaknesses. The first one is kind of the same, but to a lesser extent of her single core farming weakness, which is her damage, because once again she is usually doing neutral damage, and her attack stat isn't the greatest, and her self steroid is not crazily high. However, that is more common for most other multi-core DPSs, and the second bigger issue in my opinion is her lack of self-charge. While units like Arcwade can charge herself with 100 and Tezcatlipoca can charge himself with 50, Koyan Dark can only charge herself with 30. So unless you are using her in an event with a 50 starting charge, or you're using other spread chargers alongside her, she might struggle to MP on her own without external MP charging help. So those two are the most common issues I face when I'm using her as a multi-core DPS, but of course you can always adjust your team to fit her accordingly. In terms of challenge quest performance, the most common way I actually use Koyan Dark is as a crit DPS, and that might be a little bit confusing at first because you might ask what makes her such a great crit DPS when seemingly other more overpowered crit DPSs like Super Orion exist. Well, there are a couple of reasons that in my opinion Koyan Dark is sort of a sleeper crit DPS where people don't expect her to be good at it, but she ends up being extremely good at it. So first of all, her own skill set is already pretty nice for a crit DPS. She has, of course, a blend of Buster Up as well as Attack Up, both steroid types that benefits her crit cards, but more importantly, her third skill is a 3-turn Invul Pierce. A 3-turn Invul Pierce that directly ties to a skill is extremely valuable for a crit DPS because this means that she's not forced to use her MP every time she wants to activate this effect. Having 3 turns being such a high uptime means that Koyan Dark has ample time to deal with the enemy, even if they have an invul on them. Of course, this skill also comes with a premium 50% crit up for 3 turns. On top of her own skill sets, her MP is another tool to further bolster her crit damage. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the attack up before the MP does damage and a buster down the last 3 turns that can technically be ramped up if you use her MP multiple times in a row, also both are effects that can bolster her buster crits. So she actually has a lot more steroids than just her own skills to bolster her crit damage from her MP as well. But arguably, the most important part about Koyanskaya of Dark being a crit DPS has nothing to do with her own kit at all, but instead has something to do with her own traits and who she can work with because of these traits. So Koyan Dark is both a existence outside the domain servant as well as a chaotic evil servant. Both of these traits corresponds to 2 of the strongest neutral crit supports in the entire game. Being an existence outside of the domain servant means that Koyan Dark receives 100% extra crit up whenever Van Gogh uses her MP, and Van Gogh is generally known as the best crit support in the entire game because she not just is able to provide the entire team with a bunch of crit ups, but also can give the crit DPS all they can ever want to crit more consistently. Van Gogh has a targetable skill that can give them star absorb up, but she can also generate stars for 3 turns whenever she uses her MP, which is quite spammable as well, meaning that she can also act as an engine on top of being a crit buffing steroid. Being a chaotic evil servant means that Koyan Dark can synergize with Dolman. Dolman is able to give a chaotic evil servant 40% attack up as well as 100% crit up for 3 turns, making him a better crit support than someone like Merlin for chaotic evil servants because the crit up actually lasts for 3 turns. From my personal experience, I feel like like Van Gogh is more valuable than Dolman as a crit support, so you don't really need to have both of them, but you can always just borrow one of them from your friend as well for challenge quests. Since Koyan Dark already doesn't work that well with double Koyan Light, you can instead borrow a stronger crit support instead of running the normal buster system. I usually won't include both of them on the team as well because they threaten to hit the crit cap, which is only at 500%, and that is actually surprisingly easy to hit if you start spamming Van Gogh's MP especially. Van Gogh is also just that much more valuable because of Koyan Dark's slightly supportive skill set. Koyan Dark's spread 30 charge actually helps Van Gogh spam her MP easier. Koyan Dark also has the ability to cast Curse on enemies whenever she attacks while her skill 3 is active, and Van Gogh has a skill where she's able to absorb all curses from the party as well as from all enemies to herself, and her battery actually scales off of that curse, so every curse stack actually gives her 10 extra MP. So being able to give the enemy a bunch of curse from Koyan Dark actually allows Van Gogh to charge her MP immediately to full with that battery that scales with curse after absorbing all the enemy's curse onto herself. So there's a bunch of different good synergies between these two characters, and arguably, in my opinion, Van Gogh is Koyan Dark's most important support in challenge quests. I think it literally goes beyond any other buster support like Koyan Light or Merlin because Van Gogh just works so well with Koyan Dark. Van Gogh doesn't actually need any MP levels to actually function well with Koyan Dark because of that existence outside the domain boost. From my personal experience, even in most min turns, MP1 Van Gogh is more than enough to pair with Koyan Dark and allow her to do upwards of millions of crit damage. Even though Dolman doesn't have that many specific synergies with Koyan Dark, they still have some interesting team synergies, such as Koyan Dark working well with a curse team, as well as both of them forming a pretty good duo in a lot of multi-core farming comps because of Dolman's massive 40% attack up to all chaotic evil servants. But even outside of being a hyper-offensive crit DPS, I think Koyan Dark is still an extremely competent Buster AoE DPS. Her MP in particular functions a lot better in challenge quests than in farming because that Buster down can now both support herself, ramp up because it lasts 3 turns, and also help her team do more buster damage as well. So I like to pair her with animal trait servants that have a lot of buster cards, for example, such as Draco, or animal trait servants that has buster MPs such as Melusine, Ibuki, or Tiamat. Koyan Dark is also a DPS that can counter invul gimmicks very well because of that skill 3 giving her 3 turns worth of invul pierce. On the contrary, she's also a servant that can deal with enemy invul pierce very well because of her MP being able to remove offensive buffs that includes sure hit and invul pierce. Of course, it also works really well against enemies that like to spam offensive buffs in general, such as crit ups and attack ups. Koyan Dark, of course, can once again also fit into dot teams, even though that is sort of a niche playstyle and usually more so for memes. And I've made so many videos on Koyan Dark that I've probably made a video of her fitting in all of these roles, and I will try to curate sort of a playlist of some such and link them in the video description so you can check out all of these different examples that I briefly mentioned right here. Koyan Dark can, of course, also function as a pure support that does not take part in doing DPS. However, I don't think she is that efficient in that role, and usually I will only use her for a buster servant that also heavily benefits from overcharge that is also an animal trait servant. 2 prime examples are once again Melusine and Tiamat, which are both Buster AoE animal trait servants that also have their overcharge effect ramp up their Buster from their MP. Another great example is Tamamo Lancer. When dealing against males, she gets extra damage if her overcharge is pumped up, and she's also a Buster animal trait servant. Koyan Dark becomes a pretty good pure support for her as well. I want to end this video by tackling a topic that a lot of people are very interested in: Kuku versus Koyan Dark. They're both AoE Buster foreigners that deal extra damage to Earth attribute enemies, so it's inevitable that people are gonna pit them against each other. But in my opinion, that's not actually that great of a comparison, since everything else other than their MP effect and their anti-trait are vastly different, and they occupy very different roles in a team. In terms of single core Buster looping, Kuku demolishes Koyan Dark. I think everybody already knows this, and it's demonstrated very clearly with this graphic on screen. These are buff types icons with numbers beside them representing how big these buffs are, and these are all self buffs from either servant and how much they get on each wave because of Koyan Light's cooldown reduction and their ability to double cast steroids. So as you can see here, Kuku has more than double the amount of Koyan Dark steroids just because of how that servant works. She has a bunch of upgradable steroids with stars that just adds even more damage that all have relatively short cooldown, so they can repeat on the third wave, while Koyan Dark only has a 30% buster up and 30% attack up, and the attack up isn't even repeatable because it has a 7-turn cooldown. Kuku doesn't just excel in farming damage though, Kuku also excels in general as a independent DPS. She has better survival, a better deck with triple buster, a passive that generates 10 stars every turn, and just overall a kit that makes her very strong on her own. However, Koyan Dark, while lacking in her self-buffing kits, is very resourceful. She not just has the ability to buff her teammates, but also has synergies with some of the more powerful supports in the game. And of course, great synergy with certain units like Koyan Light or Tonaliko in multi-core farming, both things that Kuku don't necessarily have. So they don't really occupy the same space, and you won't even be that upset if you have both of them in your team. Sometimes you can even put both of them in the same team for certain farming nodes, and that would work well as well, since Kuku is an AoE Buster unit that can take advantage of Koyan Dark's first skill as well. So if you want a general suggestion in terms of who you should go for, Koyan Dark is someone who benefits greatly from having a more complete roster. If you have specific units that work well with her, she has a very high ceiling. While Kuku is someone who doesn't really need anyone else to be strong, and especially excels in single core farming if you have the Koyan Light and Oberon system up. However, she does not have the means to support other units and can mostly stick to being a main DPS. So maybe if your account already has a super highly invested main Buster DPS, someone like Arjuna Alter for example, you might want someone like Koyan Dark instead of Kuku to be more resourceful and be a more versatile tool among your roster. In conclusion, I think Koyanskaya of Dark is an amazing servant. However, she's not a servant I can easily recommend to everyone, because she usually plays second fiddle in a team rather than being in the spotlight. She is not the most potent Buster Looper in the game, far from it, nor is she the best support in the game. However, it's exactly because of how many teams she plays second fiddle in that she ends up still being quite the useful unit in a roster. Koyan Dark, of course, also has the potential to become the spotlight servant if you do have the correct supports to pair with her, and especially if you're willing to dump resources into her such as grails and gold foes. However, that is definitely more for the dedicated Koyan fans and not for the general players. Even if you're someone who likes Koyanskaya a lot, but you don't have a very established roster, still don't feel too bad. She still performs quite well individually as a DPS, especially in challenge quests. Once again, you can always just toss her into a team with another DPS and have her benefit them as well, on top of doing damage herself. I think she's a super versatile unit that has infinite potential the bigger your roster is, and unfortunately that is not the type of servant that is for everyone in the game. But if you feel like she can definitely, fit in well with your already existing SSRs, or if you're someone who plans on building around her in the future, she is definitely a servant I can still recommend, and I think you will very much enjoy her company. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it's a bit of a drag. I tried to make this sort of a deluxe version of my normal hot take video, but I still had to cut out a bunch of stuff, otherwise the video is gonna be like an hour long. So I hope I covered most of the common questions that people might have with Koyan Dark, but if you have more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll try to answer as much as possible, because not to brag, but I feel like at least for all the FGO tubers that actually make reviews, I know Koyan Dark the best by a lot compared to anyone else. So I'm very happy to answer all of your Koyan Dark related questions. And of course, Happy New Year and wish you the best of luck for pulling for Koyanskaya of Dark. I'll see you guys in the next one.